Welcome to Changing Austin. My guest today is Judge Denise Hernández. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, so we were chatting a little bit earlier, and we discovered an intersection that we both grew up outside Houston.
Yes.
And we have some kind of common experiences there.
Yeah.
So I always love to start with just, kind of tell us who you are and sort of how you came to where you are now. And so do you mind starting all the way from there?
Yeah. So I grew up in Houston, the daughter of migrant farm workers. And, my family always invested education into me, even though they had both dropped out of high school. My dad dropped out when he was in the 8th grade and my mom shortly after. They always knew that they wanted their kids to have educational success. And so I grew up with a lot of encouragement, just my parents putting me in every program they could possibly think of. And it really was that programming that encouraged me to want to be a lawyer. And then I graduated high school from Cypress Ridge High School and then went to law undergrad at the Incarnate Word in San Antonio. Made my way to Lubbock, Texas, which was quite different from Houston and San Antonio.
I believe.
To then go to law school and then find my way to Austin. And now I was practicing law for about 12 years before I became a judge.
And what inspired you to become a judge?
It was a lot of things. Some people say it's like one big moment in your life, but when I reflect back on my life, it was like a lot of small moments. And, I have to share, I grew up, in a lot of poverty. And when my parents separated, it was really hard on our family. And I watched my mom navigate eviction. And I think I was maybe 15 years old when that happened. And I knew immediately that I didn't want my mom to go through that alone. And I went with my mom to every hearing and I advocated for her because my mom, who has such a big personality in the courtroom, was really shy. And I thought that was so strange. I think that's a lot about the court system. The court system can be terrifying and it can be traumatic, and people who are bold outside of the courtroom can be really timid and scared. And in that experience, coupled with, being in a debate program, coupled with seeing how the court system, when it's not human-centered, could have really negative impacts, inspired me to say, I should bring my lived experience to the courtroom as a judge.
So it's interesting to hear you say that about the different, the way your mom showed up differently in a courtroom. Yeah. We see that a lot in banking in terms of the way that people show up in our bank branches.
Yeah.
In particular, the way folks show up if they don't speak English. And so we have a community banker. It's a program that we have that is around financial education and inclusivity. But he tells his personal story. He was 12, and he was the translator for his parents who didn't speak English. And he was very commonly the one that they would all go into the bank branch together. And his parents were taken advantage of by predatory loans where they didn't understand the terms. And it gave him this sort of sense of responsibility, as in he had done something wrong. Like he was supposed to protect his parents from that because he just happened to be the one that understood the language better. Yeah. And what he does now, he's one of our community bankers, and he says that's the reason that he does this is because his parents didn't understand the way the system worked, and they got taken advantage of by the system. And so he's taken that experience and turned it into understand how the system works and then connect other people to it in a way that they can really benefit from.
It's so true. I just recently had this experience with my dad. He's a native Spanish speaker, and he speaks English, but it's very broken. And most people have a really hard time understanding him. He wanted to, he's been working as a truck driver most of his life, making good money, but wanting to invest and not knowing how. And he did not feel comfortable going into his own credit union bank to talk to someone because there wasn't any language that said, we can speak Spanish, you can talk to us. So I took a day off so that I could drive to Houston to go with him to his bank to walk him through some of the language. And I think, is Amplify in Houston?
Anybody who lives in Texas can be a member. We don't have a physical branch in Houston, but anybody who lives in Texas can be a member.
Yeah, I'll have to tell my dad because that was an experience where I said, I could do this today, but it's going to be hard to do that every time. And I think when it comes to systems in general, that people from marginalized communities can feel really out of place unless there's intentionality in creating safety. And that's in the courtroom and banking and so many spaces. So I'm honored to be talking to you, and chatting about the impacts that we make in the world.
So I heard you wear Nikes.
I do.
Tell me about that.
My sneaker game. It's a fairly new thing because because I grew up so low income, my mom would never get me sneakers. Absolutely not. We were at the thrift store often, and so when I became a professional and I had my own money, I was like, I definitely want to up my sneaker game, and it started with the standard Panda Nikes, Panda Jordans for the Beyonce concert because at that time I was definitely rocking the chrome black and white for Beyonce's concert last year, and so I got my sneakers. And then every time I went to a big city like Houston or Dallas, I would stop at a sneaker store and just stack up the sneakers. My wife has now put a limit on the sneakers.
You have a maximum.
I have a maximum.
One in, one out?
Yeah, no outs.
Okay.
They always stay in, but like maybe not like 3 within a quarter,
These seem like fair boundaries.
Yeah, but I really love the mix of suits and sneakers. And the reason is that in the courtroom, professionalism is, I mean, I know I'm really dressed up pretty nicely today in a suit, but professionalism in the courtroom is so strict. And I started wearing sneakers with my suits so that people knew that, you can come as you are, and I would go out into public and I work specifically with a lot of justice impacted youth. And so when I would wear sneakers, when I'm meeting with justice impacted youth, they were like, "What's up, Judge? I see you in your sneaker game." And it created a sense of safety for them and rapport building. And so that they could share with me when they were experiencing hard moments. And so it's intentional too in creating a safety and bringing a humility to the role. I don't have to be clean cut and pressed the entire way. I can bring a sense of my own style that signals, hey, you can be human in this space.
Well, and maybe even like you could be sitting here one day.
Yeah,
like maybe you're sitting there. You're sitting there on a difficult side of it right now, but
yes,
maybe in another couple of years, this could be you.
Absolutely. I'm a big believer that people impacted by a social issue are the folks who can transform the issue, right? Who can bring real change. And so any youth who are justice impacted listening to this podcast, you can absolutely become a judge. Follow that dream.
Absolutely. So one reason I ask about that is because a couple of years ago, we did away with our dress code. So we used to, organizations used to have, we used to have all of these rules. And then for a long time, all the quote unquote corporate employees, so the people not in our branches, there kind of wasn't a dress code because we're in Austin and it's Austin. But our branch employees still had this dress code. And we sort of just looked up and realized, why is that? Why does this exist? It doesn't reflect our values as an organization. And so our dress code, the joke became, our dress code is you are.
I love
that's what the dress code is. And it was funny because our branch employees were so excited about it that, our branch manager up at our Round Rock branch, he has tattoo sleeves.
Yeah.
And he had spent his entire banking career wearing long sleeve shirts because he wasn't supposed to display his sleeves. Yeah. And it's like, we live in Austin, Texas. How can this be the case?
Right.
And it's been amazing how often we get feedback from our employees that felt like, oh my gosh, this is great. And one told me recently, so he's a new banker at one of our branches. And he said very often he'll have members that come into the branch and say like, oh, it's not very often that I come into a bank and I see somebody who looks like me.
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, that happens a lot? And he said, oh yeah, like on the regular. And I thought, man, so, we did it as sort of a like, well, this just doesn't reflect our values. And so here's some relic of policy past that we just never had thought of. But then you see what the impact is, not just to your employees, but in our case, to your customer.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I think about like creating inclusive spaces. We didn't say, go hire somebody with tattoos. What we said is, why do we have something that says you can't have tattoos?
Right. I think that's a beautiful example of how when you're standing more in your authenticity, whether it's as an organization or as an individual, it ripples out and people see it and notice it, and then they feel safer in those spaces and they feel like they can show up in their authenticity. And it's in every aspect of how we live. It can be in the policies that we execute, but also in just saying, I'm going to lean into masculine gender expression, right? Or I'm going to show up in my tattoos. Standing in that light and the truth of who you are really does ripple out and just returns back dividends of support from community.
1,000%.
Yeah.
So challenging systems is something that I read in your bio. How do you do that in and out of the courtroom?
Such a complex thing to do to challenge a system. Systems are made up of people, and people create culture. The unfortunate truth is when we leave culture to chance, what happens is that things just go as they always done before, right? And that can have really negative impacts. For example, they can be more focused on a professionalism that is uh, enforcing gender norms that are harmful, right? Or it can be using language that is gendered. Uh, when we aren't intentional about how we create culture, a lot of marginalization happens, and I think I'm really hyper aware of that because of my lived experience. Watching my family navigate court systems, my dad navigate immigration court. And my dad is also justice impacted. So I watched him navigate multiple systems. I watched my mom navigate multiple systems. And then as the daughter, uh, and also as a translator for my parents, recognizing that I was also impacted by all of this. So my awareness of systems was pretty heightened at a young age. And over time, it was anger that I felt about that. It turned to inspiration and a fire and a determination to say, I want to change these systems so I could help my parents. And then it turned into, I want to change these systems so that I can help people like my parents. And then turned into, I want to change systems to help community. And it took a lot of my own, I think, healing about what I had experienced in life and recognizing that my adversity is actually a strength. And it gives me a unique perspective to bring solutions forward. And so in the courtroom, I bring a very human centered approach to managing the court system, my court docket. I'm not focused on moving cases, I'm focused on addressing root issues with each individual case that's in front of me. If I have someone in front of my court who is seeing me because they're out of bond compliance, I'm asking why. I'm asking what's going on. I'm asking how are they doing? And then I'm learning these social issues that are impacting their ability to show up. And the more that I actually lean into humanness, the more I help people connect to solutions and overall success, right? And I think that's an important part that we forget in systems is that systems are not human, even though they're made up of humans. So we have to be intentional about bringing a human-centered culture to the system. We have to say, let's not focus too much on efficiency, though important. It shouldn't be the sole focus. How do we always maintain humanness in what we do so that we can not forget that we are just human beings at the end of the day experiencing life. Outside of the courtroom, I just focus on a lot of presence, being present with people. I'll ask someone how they're doing, and then I'll ask a second time because I truly get the real answer the second go
But
around.
really.
But really, how are
Yeah.
you right now? And I think just being present and pausing and not being in a rush all the time allows me to remind the folks around me that I truly care.
Mhm.
And then there's a reciprocalness in the relationship where they feel safe to say, how are you really doing? And then I share. And I think just by operating differently, not being in robot mode, being present, being mindful, really wanting to know how people really are, is how I challenge systems on my day-to-day life outside of the courtroom.
So it's interesting reflecting on that because as I think about the way we train some of our team members, we have these design targets about the different channels and how we train people to interact with them. And one of the channels is service by phone. So if somebody picks up a phone to call, how do we guide that service? And on purpose, one of our design targets is not efficiency. So one of our design targets for online is availability and efficiency.
Yeah.
That's where we are seeking efficiency. But on purpose, we talk about service by phone is empathy and effectiveness. And when we train around it, we specifically say we are not aiming for efficiency here because if we didn't first understand your problem
Yeah.
and help you know we understood it, and most importantly, feel the pain you're feeling, because
Yeah.
I would love to believe people pick up a phone to call and compliment us. No, Not usually. If they're
No.
picking up a phone, there's something they need to do or there's a problem that they have.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter that in the first, 30 seconds of the phone call, our agent knows what their problem is and could tell them how to fix it. If they interrupt them to tell them to do that,
Yes.
then we haven't actually solved the problem. Like, you've
Yeah.
got to give them the time to be able to say what the thing is and then give them some feedback that says, here's what I understand. Am I right? And
Yeah.
now we get to the solution. Now, it actually is an effective solution. And so in my mind, the irony is that's so much more efficient.
It absolutely it is, because then they feel trust, right? They're going to trust in the organization a little bit more, and they're not going to hesitate to reach out. And the second go around, there's going to be a trust that doesn't need to be rebuilt. It's going to be further cultivated. And I think this is just such a beautiful example of what it means to be human-centered. We're not focused on numbers. We're just focused on human connection. And people just want to be heard, even if they're upset. They don't want to be interrupted. They want to be heard, because so much of life sometimes intentionally doesn't allow people to be heard. So why not intentionally create space where people can be heard and build trust with an organization and or with a person or within the courtroom? We can do that by doing things on purpose.
So one question I want to ask, Amplify has had partnerships with some organizations that are focused on support for justice-involved youth or individuals and or employment around that. And one thing I find really interesting is some of the strongest advocates for that tend to be those in the justice system and those in law enforcement.
Yeah.
Which I find really telling about, maybe one of the best ways to help somebody not have to revisit the justice system is that they can have an ability to earn income afterward.
Absolutely.
And so I would wonder, we have a lot of business owners and executives who listen to this podcast. Do you have any advice for them about if, how, and should they be thinking about, as prospective employee candidates, should I be thinking about someone who's been involved with the justice system, and how can I do it?
Absolutely. Statistics and data show that youth who are impacted by the justice system are oftentimes entering in the justice system because of trauma, whether that's childhood trauma and or instability in the household, food insecurity. It is rarely because, quote unquote, they're a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
And so statistics also show by focusing on workforce development, educational support, a human-centered approach to reentry by connecting to stable jobs increases the likelihood that they will be successful and not enter back into the justice system. Who knew? Focusing on the humanness of people will actually make them more stabilized in their life so they don't interact with the justice system.
Breaking news right now.
Breaking news. There's a great data hub out of Columbia University that's really focused on producing out this research. And it says, by giving job opportunities to emerging adults, to youth who have system involvement, it not only benefits the individual, but it also benefits the organization because their loyalty to the organization who says, I see you as a human and I want to support your success. The individual is going to be very loyal to the organization because they want to give back to what has been given to them. It creates a reciprocal relationship. And so, my court leads a youth diversion program for individuals between the ages of 17 to 20. Those kids are the hardest working kids that I know. They are passionate human beings who are just looking for an opportunity for someone to see them as human and not one act that came up in their life. And I think that when we really just allow support to exist for kids, because they are kids, for young adults who are just navigating and trying to figure out life, we create overall success for our community as a whole, right? And so I'm a big believer in this. I'm glad that y'all are doing it. I hope other executives take a look at the research out of Columbia University that shows that by making this investment, the investment comes back tenfold to the community as a whole.
Well, and one thing that we discovered in doing this was, so it was a couple of years ago where we kind of started looking at programs like this, and I actually had some conversations with our folks internally, and they said, "Really, like we're gonna consider this?" And well, but what about this and what about that? And I said, "Well, here's the first thing you got to know: we aren't changing anything about our hiring standards or our practices. So if you wouldn't be qualified to be an employee at Amplify because you don't meet these standards and qualifications, then you're still not qualified. But what we're not going to do is decide that something that is irrelevant to your role as a teammate here is something that's going to stop you from being considered for a position.
Absolutely.
And it was interesting how that took us culturally a little while to wrap our minds around because, I mean, speaking to the idea of efficiency, well, it's just very efficient to put at the very top of the job application process, what do you have a history of? And then nobody looks any further than that. And it's like, and we don't understand what we're losing if we do that, even as a community for certain, but even as employers.
Yes.
I mean, this is a tight job market. Don't you want a hardworking, loyal, and effective employee? There are more ways to find them.
Absolutely. And, I'm a big believer that folks who have experienced marginalization actually are some of the most innovative human beings. They know what it's like to be very efficient and innovative in how they take care of themselves to survive, right? With very little money, with very, very little resources. The investment into those individuals allows them to take that innovation to the next level. I mean, statistically, I shouldn't even be a judge. I grew up with parents who had no high school education, and that would have led me down a completely different path. And if people would have viewed me by my upbringing and my bad choices and my trauma, I wouldn't be here. It is people who believed in me and saw my humanness who gave me opportunity and allowed me to shine that encouraged me to even feel confident enough to say, I'm going to law school and then I'm going to run for office and then I'm going to be a judge. And that's like the American dream where we give people opportunity to rise and to thrive. And we have to be willing to take the risk to do that.
So you chose to run for office, and those words scare the bejesus out of so many people. And so many people would say, oh my gosh, I would never run for office. It sounds like a terrible experience. It sounds awful. What made you do it, and what would you say to people who are thinking about it or have that opinion?
I felt it was so important to have a perspective of someone who is system impacted. As I mentioned, my dad is formerly incarcerated, and most of the men in my life have been formerly incarcerated. And I have seen firsthand the negative impacts of watching a parent go to jail, and how hard that is, and how traumatic that can be for development to a child who is present for that. And because of that, I have such a unique perspective on what justice means, on how to bring human-centered approaches to the courtroom. And so I had been practicing law for about 12 years, and I was doing trauma-informed work as a lawyer for quite some time. And I just knew that the folks who create change in the courtroom are the judges. And I wanted to see a courtroom that was really intentional about being trauma informed, about showing kindness, about extending humanness to people and honoring human dignity. And I was highly encouraged by the people around me to say, you should run. This would be really big. You have such a unique perspective. And so I ran, scared. I was terrified. It was hard. It, was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it was for something more than me. It was for community. It was for representation. And I'm honored to be the first openly gay judge to serve a county court in Travis County, Texas. And I hope that other folks who come into my courtroom see me and see themselves and see that they can be in those roles. And, I'm blessed to interact with people often who always say, this courtroom is different. I felt safe here. The amount of people who cry in joy of feeling seen as a human happens so often in my courtroom. And that's not because it's by chance. It's because I ensure that my team shows up with humanness. I show up in humanness, and we treat people with human dignity in the courtroom, and people feel it. And that's why I do this work.
So this is not the only work you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, as if you weren't busy enough.
Yeah.
So you're a business owner. Tell us about that side.
Yeah. So, when I was a lawyer, before I became a judge, my wife and I had started a social impact business called Hustle for the Cause, focused on social innovation and production that would uplift images of communities in a positive light. This was during a time when immigrant communities were being torn down in the national light, when LGBTQ communities were being torn down in a national light. And we knew that we wanted to create space that was safe where we could celebrate who we were and we could celebrate our communities and our intersectional identities. And so we started that business back in 2018. We put on some events focused on just uplifting the social good of people. We put on a festival called Chingona Fest that's really focused on Latina empowerment. And that eventually shifted into just creating social impact everywhere we could. And so that led to me starting a suit business. Suit, not soup. Suit business called called Dapper Sueños, to create safe space where women can lean into their dapperness. Women and non-binary folks and our trans communities can feel dapper in all of their existence. And so that's something that I do for fun. I get to play my creativity, and it's such a beautiful way to honor people. When I get to customize a suit for a queer woman who's about to marry their wife, it is just like the most rewarding thing I could possibly do. And I live in joy in that, because I know my own personal experience. It took me a lot to find a suit that I felt good in, right? One that just helped elevated my confidence. Because a lot of suits built for women are not like they're really feminine, or they have really huge shoulder pads, and that works for some folks, but it didn't work for me, and I wanted something that brought my masculine energy forward. And so we've been in the suit business now for about 2 years, and it's been fun.
So one thing I love to ask people is, as you think about the time you've been in Austin and you look back, what is the change in Austin that you think you find most exciting, that you think has contributed most to our city in a positive way?
I have really enjoyed watching intersectional space grow in Austin. We have, as human beings, we have a multitude of identities, right? I'm not just a woman, and I'm not just Latina, and I'm not just gay. I'm all these things, and I have really just admired how space has been more intentional with saying we're going to be intersectional with how we bring people together. So we've seen the rise of queer women of color spaces be cultivated, and events be created where women can come together as entrepreneurs and just talk about the struggle of being women of color, but being queer as well, right? So you can be seen in all of the intersectionalities of your identities. And then we have more events popping up that are focused on wellness, but wellness specifically for queer folks. And I think this is a really beautiful aspect of safety, where we focus on this grander thing, whether it's entrepreneurship or wellness, but then we say, but we're going to put this through the lens of a marginalized community. And there's tons of organizations in Austin building space like that. And I just love the safety that's created there, because then I can go there and I can also learn about the issues that I know I'm experiencing as a woman of color, queer entrepreneur, and I can hear from other folks like me who are navigating those issues and finding solutions, and we're building community and uplifting each other. It's been really beautiful to watch that, because when I moved here to Austin, that was missing a bit, and I can see how it's starting to grow and cultivate.
Okay, so let's go the other direction.
Yeah.
Let's look to the future.
Yeah.
So as you think about the lasting impact that you want to have on Austin, what do you want that to be?
When I think about the lasting impact that I want to leave in Austin, I really want to encourage people to be more present with each other, to be slower in life, to take time to watch the birds with someone, to not feel so rushed and pressed to get something done. Austin is a growing city. It's ever changing, but one of the things that I've truly loved about being in the city is when you take time to slow down. The beautiful music that comes from the nature of this city is just captivating. It reminds us that we're human. It reminds us that we're interconnected to nature. And I think it's important for us to lean into that, to be slow, to be present, to lean into our interconnection. And I think the more that we do that, the more we're going to take care of each other. So I really hope that the legacy I live encourages people to be present, to lean into interconnection, and to take care of each other deeper.
Well, I can't think of a better thing to leave it on. Thank you.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for having me, Stacy.